We thought, this is the wrong guy, you know, why, I mean, we need a retail person. So there were a whole lot of things that combined, really, with Sherry Cohn and I decided the time had come. You know, I realized if I was ever going to design any more type, I really had to leave, because one typeface in 10 years is not a good batting average.
So you left in 91, and in 92 you formed Carter and Cohn.
That's right.
And where were you based?
In Cambridge. Yeah.
By the way, Bitstream, when it started, there was no Adobe, there was no real competitor, so they were way ahead, and they did very well for a while, but then you get into desktop publishing, the world starts to change.
Yes.
So now you are an independent company, and you and Sherry, who's a great marketer, are doing great things with typography. What did you learn from all that?
From Bitstream, you mean?
No, from your experience with Carter and Cohn.
Oh, well, it's still going on, I'm happy to say. I'm learning every day. We
Do you do
started-
every typeface under that name, or do you do anything as just Matthew Carter? Does it all go through that company?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we do quite a lot of custom work, so that would not have the Carter & Co. name on it. I mean, if I do a font for New York Times, it's New York Times's, you know. And so,
I got
yeah. But for the retail library, the Carter & Co. faces are called Carter & Co. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, what did I learn? The time that we started, 91, was a good time because we were not the first independent type foundry by any means. I mean, Emigre had been out there for a while. Our fellow Bitstream employee, David Berlow, had started the Font Bureau, I think, 18 months or so before us. Sumner Stone was starting out about the same time. But there was a realization that there was a third-party market for fonts. You know, if you had a linotype, phototype, or digital machine, I mean, you didn't have to buy your PostScript fonts from Linotype. There were other sources of PostScript fonts, including an increasing number of independent sources. And frankly, most of the interesting development work was coming from the independents. And so this was a good, you know, our moment of birth was quite lucky in the sense that there was a sort of a developing interest in independently designed and produced and manufactured type. And when PostScript Type 1, you know, originally PostScript Type 3 was the only format you could make. But when Type 1 came about, and essentially someone like myself, I mean, I could make a font that technically was the same as an Adobe font. I mean, it was, you know, the Type 1 format was fabulous. And Fontographer had seen this coming, and they produced a new version of Fontographer that did Type 1 fonts. So there were a whole lot of things that sort of came together, I think partly by luck, that were good for us at that time. Yeah.
You were in the most interesting period in the history of typography because 81, we're still in an analog age, we're getting into some digital.
Yeah.
By the time you get to desktop publishing, when you get into the 90s, now Adobe comes in,
Yeah.
PostScript now starts to dominate in
Yeah.
most ways. You had the font wars, if you
Yes.
will, and during the font wars, Adobe won for a while, but then Microsoft competes with them, and they settle on some agglomeration of
Yeah.
format.
Yeah.
And so now you're into sort of a standardized world of fonts, if you will. You design a font, it could run on any device
Yes.
out there.
Yes.
So it opens up new markets. And your evolution is interesting, because you worked in the old world of cutting a punch by hand, into the linotype casting machines, into the old photo typesetting market, into the digital market. Are you not the last person to have done that?
I don't really know, Frank. I mean, I am very old. I mean, that's.
Well, welcome to the club.
Yeah, you know, some people have been very kind and sort of congratulated me on this, and I'm happy to take credit for it. But I don't know what else I could have done. I mean, you know, if you're working in the type business and it goes digital, I guess I could have gone and been a hermit and something like that. But I've always been interested, as I said, working with engineers and with the technical developments and so on. And so I never wanted to drop out, so to say, of the industrial aspect of type, which is really what has interested me. I mean, I regard myself as an industrial designer, frankly.
Really?
Oh, yes.
What are you working on right now?
I have some work from the dear old New York Times, which never seems to stop exactly, but it's mostly new weights and widths, new versions of existing typefaces and so on. So it's not the most fascinating work, but I'm so fond of them by now that I'm happy to do it. Jordan and I were talking about this in the car. You know, Adobe have announced that, I think from the end of this year, PostScript fonts will no longer work in InDesign, and maybe not in the Apple operating system either, I'm not really sure. And so a bunch of people who have PostScript fonts have suddenly thought, oh my God, you know, I'm going to have to get some OpenType font. And this happened to me with a couple of long-standing clients, including Yale. Many years ago, I was commissioned to design a typeface for Yale University. And most of the conversions to OpenType had already been done. But John Gamble, the printer, woke up the other day and found that there were some sort of subsidiary fonts and things they didn't use all that much. But obviously they would have to be converted. And so I've been working on those. And, you know, because the OpenType format is open-ended in terms of character set, I can combine what used to be a number of different fonts. I did this also for Galliard. You know, when Sherry and I started in '91, the first thing I did was a version of Galliard, which we licensed from Linotype. And I think if you bought the PostScript fonts for just the Roman italic of Galliard, there were actually 11 fonts, because there were old-style figures, there were modern figures, there were fractions, there were extras, there were I don't know what. Now you can roll that all up into a single OpenType font. So I've been doing a good deal of that, and that's interesting, to compile these very big character sets in order to make these faces usable into the future, which instead of, you know, dying a death on the 31st of December this year.
Do you have any hobbies?
Not really. I generally carry a camera, and I'm quite fond of taking snap. I mean, I don't take it very seriously, but I wouldn't say it was a hobby, but you know, in this bag of mine, there is in fact a camera.
We haven't seen you use it yet.
No, I haven't used it yet. But no, I don't really have, you know, I don't play golf or something like that. I don't have hobbies of that kind.
Do you work every day?
I do some work every day. I have to admit that my stamina isn't what it was when I landed at Ryerson Street and worked long hours every day and weekends and so on. I don't work as much as that. But yeah, I'm still working. Yeah.
What was the last book you bought about type?
I don't buy many books about type. I get given books about type, which is very nice.
I know.
You know, you probably know better than I do. Boy, I'm trying to think.
Yeah, I thought maybe you read something about a book and they didn't give it to you and you said, oh, I have to have that.
That does happen. That does happen.
I remember your library was sparse, but interesting.
I know. Again, Jordan and I were talking about this. You know, people think I will be, that I'm a big collector of type specimens and so on. I'm absolutely not. I have about 3. The reason is libraries. You know, I grew up in London. bus ride from St Bride Library. Why would I, penniless starter out, go and buy a Caslin specimen, money I didn't have, rather than go to St Bride's where they got 30 Caslin specimens, some of them probably unique. So I had no need of having my own library as I was first starting to work. I went to libraries, learned to use libraries, which is a skill, by the way.
Any children in your family taking up the?
I have a stepson and a son. Neither of them have the slightest interest in what I do. Never have had. When I was showing signs of being interested in all of this, my dad wanted me to do something else because he said conversation at the dinner table would be more interesting if I did something else. I think he was horrified at the thought of typographic discussions at home at the dinner table, which never happened, by the way. You needn't have worried. No, my offspring have had no interest at all in type and typography. I mean, they're computer literate, but not.
So you work at a computer. I assume it's Fontographer.
Yes, Gerard Unger, my dear friend, used to say that there were only 2 people left using Fontographer. With Gerard's death, I'm probably the only one. I mean, I do have some other tools, particularly for generating fonts, but I'm so used to drawing in Fontographer. I mean, I can do it without sort of conscious thought, So I do still use Fontographer. I have to have an old Mac to run it because it's not been supported. So I have 2 Macs side by side. I draw on one and I do everything else on the other.
That's
It
interesting.
works. Thanks to AirDrop, it works.
And I have to ask you this question, and I know it's ridiculous. What's your favorite font?
I once read an interview with Margaret Atwood, the novelist. She was asked the same question about her books and said, I can't say because the other ones are listening. So I don't have a favorite of my own or anyone else's typeface. What I do have is favorite uses of type, but they can change by the day. I can see a book jacket or something or other using a typeface and I can say, that really makes that typeface look good, whatever the typeface is. Or I can pick up a newspaper and see something and think, come on, that's a really good use of that typeface. So I react very much more to typefaces in play, in use, than I do in any kind of objective way. And where any attempt to, what's a good example? I mean, I have to say, Souvenir is not one of my favorite typefaces, I suppose. But I really was fond of Ed Bengat. So if I see Souvenir, I see Ed, So trying to be objective about typefaces is very hard for me, because there are so many associations with people when I see them that I've given up trying to be objective about it. I'm sorry not to have an answer for you.
No,
but
that's
that
fine.
is an honest
That's
answer.
what we're looking
I'm not
for.
being coy. That's an honest
When
answer.
you and I lived through that period of the 60s and 70s, 80s, 90s, there were a few hundred typefaces that we dealt with.
Yeah.
The classics, the Caslans, the
Yeah.
Baskervilles,
Yeah.
etc. Every day I get 3 emails promoting at least 100 fonts at a time
Yes,
from Bitstream and other companies.
yes,
There are now, I calculate, over 1 million typefaces out there, mostly decorative.
yeah,
When you open up Netflix and you look at all the pictures of the movies, they're all different fonts.
yes.
Okay, and yet we still use only a handful of text faces, the classics more than
Yeah.
anything else.
Yeah.
How are we going to deal with 1 million fonts?
Beats me. I mean, I don't really know.
I mean, just cataloging them is an impossible task.
I know, and I tell you where this is really a problem in the life of people like me, because occasionally I'm asked to judge type design competitions.
Ha ha.
Ha ha. And, you know, there's usually about, say, 4 judges doing this, but none of us can pretend that we really know whether an entry in the competition is genuine in the sense that it's not knocked off from something or other, because we don't know all those million typefaces. Nobody does, and so on. So in those terms, it's been a problem. We had you know, I'm have been one of the judges for the Murasawa competition, and we had a close call once. I mean, we did select a typeface, which actually before the results got publicly announced, someone put their hand up and said, I don't think this is right, you know, and it wasn't. We had been fooled. We caught it in time. But the day will come when somebody's going to be wrong about that. So that is an actual problem of having so many typefaces. You know, you were saying there were so few when we got started. One of the first jobs that Mike sicked on me when I arrived in Brooklyn was, you know, there's the 50 Books of the Year competition.
Yeah, we always do a press release on the Mercantile fonts that we use.
That's right. My job was to go over to, was it the ARGA who did this? Because when you filled out the form for your entry, you had to put what the name of the typeface was. But everyone has discovered that a great many of these were wrong. And so my job was to go and read all of these entries for the 50 winners and correct the attribution of the typefaces, which you could do in those days because
there weren't that many.
There weren't that many, and I knew, you know. God forbid I should have to do that now. I wouldn't know.
It's an impossible task.
Impossible.
And of course, Bitstream is now, not Bitstream, Monotype Imaging is now the 800-pound gorilla.
Yes.
In terms of typefaces.
Yes.
They bought out most of the big libraries of the past.
They sure did.
And they're like a gazillion designers. We had a graphic designer here the other day, and he gave a talk about how he designed his own font. And so there are now about 20 programs for designing typefaces.
Yes, yes. But interestingly enough, maybe it has to do with the million number. As far as I know, Monotype let go of all their designers.
There are more lawyers working there than there are designers.
Yeah, I don't think there are any real designers.
Yeah, again, because there are so many freelancers out there who are willing to give them
Exactly.
fonts to sell.
Exactly.
Matthew, this has been phenomenal. When I proposed this to Matthew, by the way, he said 2 nattering octogenarians, just what we need. But this has been very
Very
insightful.
patient.
So no, we understood a different side of you and how you evolved, and we appreciate your support of the museum. So thank you very much.
That's my pleasure. May I ask a question of the audience?
Sure you can.
Which came up again. You know, I designed this typeface for Yale University several years ago, and it's been used a lot around the university. And John Gamble, the printer, sent me an email just the other day, and he said, you know, there's a great revival of interest around Yale in letterpress printing. Students, faculty, alums, they really are into letterpress. Is there any way of making actual type? I mean, what my dad said, you know, type is something you can pick up and hold in your hand, of the Yale typeface. So does anyone know of any current method using, you know, 3D manufacturing or something of making actual type? Yes.
Ed?
I have a Benton, ATF Benton engraver, and I make new faces in hot metal all the time.
Thank you. This is worth the trip. May I have your card? Thank you.
By the way, you may have one of the last Benton engravers on Earth. I think Patrick Guzens in Antwerp has one, and I don't know of any others.
Yeah, Greg Walters has one.
But Greg died.
Yes, but they're forming a non-for-profit.
Oh, really?
And it's going to stay there. And David McMillan in Wisconsin has another, but they don't have all the ancillary equipment, which.
It's one
we're working-
beautiful machine,
Yeah, it's
isn't it?
fabulous.
Well, that's what
Yes.
made type when you get right
Yes,
down to it.
Yes, yeah,
Without that, the Bentons gave us a great thing.
yeah. Well, thank you. That's my question for you all.
Again, there's plenty of food up here. Please enjoy yourselves, and please chat with Matthew. Thank you again, Matthew.